Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Alfred.
Yes, good morning, Alfred.
Hi, ɁTARER. I don't know if, good morning, Lucia. ŁTARER, I don't know if what the protocol is. Do we feel we have a significant part of participants? Shall we start?
It's not a problem.
Okay, so, well, this is unusual for all of us, but I'd like to welcome everyone to this EduCop. And today we have very significant involvement of ACCA in delivering the EduCop and the training sessions. And so I'd like to welcome Lucia in particular, who is Director of Markets for ACCA and has been part of the executive team leading the development of ACCA in Africa emerging markets, having initially been involved in over 40 countries, including Asia, Europe, and Latin America, and more recently, the development of the Russian language advanced diploma in finance and business, which is very important to our STAREP and CAREP countries. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Lucia to give some opening remarks and introduction for this workshop.
Many thanks, Alfred, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lucia Riel-Martin, as Alfred said. I'm the Executive Director of Markets for ACCA. And firstly, I would like to convey my wish for safety and well-being to all of the participants of this ACCA and WorldBank event. It is indeed an immense pleasure to join you all virtually. And COVID has changed and has challenged the way we meet and build partnerships, but it also is giving us opportunities to maybe do things a little differently. And while I know that this event was initially planned to be a face-to-face one, the opportunity that we have is that by doing it virtually, we're able to have many more participants, and I'm delighted to be with you today. I'd like to start my welcome with a huge thanks to the Center for Financial Reporting Reform of the World Bank for organizing this session and for bringing regulators, government officials and educators so that we can together discuss issues around the role of educators in how we build the finance talent of the future. This pandemic has indeed highlighted the critical role of a number of professions, of course, our healthcare professionals, but also educators, all of you, who in the most challenging situation have shown not only the resilience, but the foresight to utilize your talent and your profession for the greater good. So I just really want to acknowledge and thank you all for what you're doing to build a better future. And today's program is very timely, and we have very clear objectives, and these will ensure that everyone is familiar with and have access to all the resources and publications issued by the World Bank to support the reform of accountancy education in the region. And also you learn a little bit more about ACCA and how we help create the finance professionals the world needs through our qualification, but also the partnership network that many of you are part of. And ACCA, as a global body for accountants and finance professionals, builds a global community of over 771,000 members and feature members that operate in over 179 countries and uphold the highest professional and ethical standards. And educators, learning partners, and indeed universities are very much part of this thriving community. And as educators, you have an essential role in this interconnected ecosystem that creates the global finance profession that is so committed to ethical standards and trust. And through the provision of the ACCA qualification, our learning partners and educators develop the skills, the competencies, and the talents needed in the finance profession. And we rely on this fruitful cooperation between our partners and the support and collaboration of all of you working at forward-looking academic institutions across the region. So we're really all part of this network that builds transparency and helps design and update global standards for the accountancy and finance profession. And at ACCA, we truly believe that the business environment benefits for the adoption of global standards, and has actually for many years committed to this. We were the first professional body to introduce IFRS in our curriculum back in 1996. And the benefits that come with it, eliminating the distance and the difference between national standards and being able to converge to a common international framework, really are demonstrated through the transparency and the trust in business and public sector that we're able to build. An integrated education ecosystem, it's really part of this international framework that we all work together to ultimately support professional accountants, and in our case, ACCA members and future members, to succeed through the attainment of the qualification, but also for better employment opportunities. And indeed, this ecosystem as an integral part of our new strategy to 2025. And why I wanted to share a little bit of that is because our new strategy really reinforces the very reason why ACCA exists. And our revised purpose, which I want to share with you, states that we are a force for public good. We lead the global accountancy profession by creating opportunity. And how we do that is in a number of ways, and I just want to share a few with you. Start with our leadership in capacity building, working with governments and contributing to the formation of professional bodies in countries where they're still in development, whether it's in this region, other parts of the world, such as countries at the moment we're involved in countries like Myanmar, in Rwanda, in Africa, in Afghanistan, but also through the involvement of our professional insight work about the future of audit or digital technologies in finance, and indeed promoting innovation in the public sector through our certifications, whether on IPSAS or in public financial management. So as you can see, all of this really advances the involvement of the profession in the UN Sustainable Development Goals and social mobility. And these contributions of the profession and ACCA are only possible because of the strength of our relationships and the partnerships that we forge. And in the arena of academia, we have more than 900 of these higher education institutions partnerships, and many of them are revolving around exemption accreditation to be able to accredit programs, and as a result, ACCA qualified accountants are able to leverage their education and build really impressive careers that extend way beyond accountancy and finance, and accessing many roles at C-suite level. So improving competencies for accountants really demands this ecosystem that I was mentioning before, and this is the real power of our connections between educators and employers that can offer the best learning experience and the best career and job opportunities, and that also help those common approaches that I was mentioning before, and global standards that are so much needed for successful international trade and global trust. So therefore, building partnerships is so fundamental, not only for our strategy, but for the global professional, and really creates value. And just to finish, I wanted to also bring an aspect of this value that is also found on ACCA's work as a regulator. And as an experienced player in the regulatory environment, ACCA is involved in the development of standards and approaches to regulation, including audit monitoring. We regulate our members in the audit profession in the UK and Ireland to ensure that they meet the requirements of national legislation, such as rules governing the qualification of statutory auditors. And I just want to finish with an example of how we bring that regulation experience and build partnerships. And it's a cooperation with the Ministry of Finance in Ukraine, and I believe we have some participants here with us today. We started a collaboration in 2018 where we signed an MOU starting working and sharing best practice on audit regulation related matters. And we had a number of MOF representatives, Ms. Garoponenko and Ms. Nikitan, who are on the line with us, visiting our headquarters in London and able to share this best practice. We continue that association as the Audit Public Oversight Body in the Ukraine was formed, and not only looked at audit, but also extended beyond to the accounting and IFRS fields. And even this year, together with the World Bank, we moved that cooperation to public sector and IPSAS. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the number of cooperations and the type of cooperations that we can extend, and examples in the region that we really look forward to continue to explore with all of you. So with that, I want to wish you a very fruitful seminar and greater cooperation amongst educators, regulators, and the profession to build transparency and accountability for further prosperity in the region. And now I'm going to be handing over to Alfred at the World Bank, who's going to be sharing with you publications and resources developed by the CFRR to support accounting education reforms. Many thanks. Over to you, Alfred.
Thank you, Lucia, for those great words. I think it's really important that we integrate the education with the profession and with the regulators. There is no, as we all know, and certainly at the World Bank with accounting reforms, it's one thing to adopt laws and to establish regulators, but it's how the implementation and the application of those rules really relies on a profession and highly trained individuals. So it's great. It's been great to work with ACCA, and I hope that will continue. As you know, I've worked for CPA Canada in the past, so I could relate to a lot of the things that you were saying as what professional bodies can do. And we've also worked with ICAW, so I think it's great to have a global professional body, a number of regional bodies, and we're very grateful for the assistance and involvement that ACCA provides. And I think I encourage people to go to these websites. I think there's a lot of resources out there that we sometimes forget to use or to access, and hopefully that's one of the things which I'll be bringing to this workshop. So this is also very special for me, this environment in which we're working. I'm actually talking to you from Vancouver in Canada, which I joined a few weeks ago after the travel restrictions were set in. Actually, it was an interesting experience, but I think it's a substitute to Bucharest, and the great thing is we still are able to involve ACCA, and thanks especially to Olga and Elena, who without whom this wouldn't have been possible, bringing this event together, bringing ACCA's expertise and knowledge to this event. So for me, it's also a special event for another reason. This is my last involvement in the STAREP EduCop as a leader of the program, as I'll be moving to another role, taking on responsibilities in Latin America over the summer. So I think it was very important to me to have this opportunity to bring part of this history, I guess, and resources together. We've also we've recently launched our new website, and I think in this environment, obviously, where the ability to bring books and share printed resources is going to be replaced by new ways of sharing information and knowledge, it was really important that we bring together and that we deliver, as far as I'm concerned, on some of our promises. I also remember the willingness of the members of the EduCop to trade in a workshop for some resources which were promised. So I'm now going to share my screen, and hopefully you will be able to see my presentation. So here we are, and I'm going to go into full presenter mode. So what I am going to do in about half an hour is go over the workshops quickly, but more importantly, the publication and resources and tools that we've developed. I'm sharing my screen with the Russian screen. The majority of the attendees are Russian speakers. We have some non-Russian speakers as well, but I'm pretty sure you are able to access the materials in English, and so please do so. So, as I said, the program was launched in 2014. So a number of workshops have been held during this period, and I wanted to sort of review those briefly before pointing out the publications and the resources that we've made available on our websites. It's sometimes easy to overlook. There's a lot of information on the internet that we find not so useful, understandably, but hopefully this will help us link as well, because some of these resources were developed specifically with the EDUCOPs in mind. So the workshops, just wanted briefly, again, for someone who are new to this EDUCOP or to these meetings, to go over the history since STAREP EDUCOP was launched in 2014. And it's really, for me, it's really interesting to go back and reminisce and see how much has been achieved over the years. Of course, the program was launched before I actually joined the center. I joined in 2015, and so it was launched in 2014. So a number of experts have been involved over the years. And I think the focus, we can clearly say, as I was reviewing this, has moved from looking at undergraduate programs to what should be in an undergraduate programs, identifying then the gaps through the profiling tool in particular. As we work through the workshops, we were reporting on the results, and we were able to go to the different capitals of the STAREP countries. There was also, throughout this, then the intent of supporting the reform as required, identifying what was a regional curriculum. And then a workshop that we held in Minsk looked specifically at the international education standards, which were then translated fully into Russian. And then we started looking at developing more specifically resources for universities and professional accountancy bodies for their certification programs. And yes, we've kind of missed one. I'm reporting the Bucharest event. It was something we were all looking forward to, but hopefully we will get most of the content through this workshop. So the topics were varied, and we had a number of key speakers. We are, also paying tribute to Liam Coogan, who many of you will know, who passed again before I joined the center, and who was really very dedicated to this process, and a number of others. And we've also had, it's important, I guess, to point out, it wasn't just the work of the World Bank and the CFRR experts, but we've also made you work and produce work on identifying your own gaps and get you thinking about the reforms. Again, there is no perfect practice, and every example we can give then needs to be adapted to your own needs and your own environment. And I certainly know different regulatory environments, different training needs for different kinds of PAO members, accountants, auditors, internal auditors, regulators, etc. So the tools we used, a lot of you will be familiar, and this may bring some good or not so good memories. The extensive profiling tool, which was a massive spreadsheet, which some of you were involved in completing, and which helped certainly with the initial evaluation of programs. And we've also used it in the Kyrgyz Republic, and we've also used it in Serbia, who are attending this meeting. And the tool developed by the CFR also based on international education standards, but also using the learning outcomes of the ACCA program and the SIPFA program. And as I always say, we don't, we could have used programs of other countries, and we would have probably come out with similar results, because there is certainly a great convergence in international education programs. But using ACCA has the added advantage that then the organization of the content and the terminology used becomes familiar for an organization which is present in the region and even has a Russian language program. So this was some of the graphs. We had these very colorful graphs, which Ian Ritchie was involved at the time as a consultant and accompanying us on many of our workshops. And as you know, the common theme, I guess, which predictably started appearing with a number of variations, of course. These are very general results, and we shouldn't read too much into the exact numbers, but the common theme, certainly that management accounting and performance management were areas which former Soviet countries had little experience in and were maybe not as strong in their programs as other fundamental accounting content. So this was certainly useful in terms of helping guide the reforms. And then we also, along the way, again, encourage you to go and visit our new website, because we've produced a number of publications. One of the things was the core curriculum. As I mentioned, we used the profiling tool, and with the involvement of the EDUCOP members, identified what they felt, what you felt should be in all the programs, and that this could then be used as a basis for exchange and mutual recognition. So this was produced with the help of the EDUCOP members, published in Russian. We also worked with the International Federation of Accountants, or the International Accounting Education Standards Board, and translated into Russian the education standards. So the official Russian version of the education standards, which is available on the IFAC website, was produced by the CFRR. And as I mentioned, we then worked with, we got the EDUCOP members to work on their own environment and see their own strategies and how they would prioritize the reforms. And grateful also to the donors who've extended the STAREP program, because what has happened in many of these projects, by the time we finish the first stage of the project, we still realize, okay, this is what we need to do. Now we need more time and resources to implement it. So hopefully this work will continue. But also encourage you maybe to compare the work of each other's countries. And finally, we produced a regional study. I've got a publication date of 30th of September. I'm fairly confident it will be on our website before the end of June or early July. And again, this was produced again with the help of all the EDUCOP members, as we've sent you questionnaires, and we've used the information from the profiling tool to see some regional trends and recommendations. And special thanks to Svetlana Platon. I'm not sure if she's online today, but Svetlana, as a consultant and certainly involved in the EDUCOP and representing also Moldovan universities, was instrumental in producing this study. And finally, the last but not least, I want to look briefly at the resources and to revisit them. Again, I think we can sometimes find that there's a lot we can gloss over, and the language is an issue which I understand, and which is why I'm very happy to report more of these resources have been translated into Russian. So the resources I want to go over is the competency-based accounting education training and certification guide, which is now available since yesterday, actually, on the website of the WorldBank in Russian. We shared this publication in printed form with you at our last EDUCOP in Vienna in November 2018. And STAREP members clearly told me, that's great, but if you're able to produce it in Russian, will be a lot more useful to us. So this is now there, and I think it's really important because it helps guide the reforms, and it helps not just look at international standards, but then look at how they would be implemented. We then produced competency-based accounting education and assessment materials. And this is in draft form. It was shared with you, or it isn't yet on the website because it's in draft form. But I think it will also be much more specific and tailored to educators. And I'll go over it in a bit more detail later. And finally, continuing professional development guide for accountants and auditors. This was developed through the Serbian program, and we have some members from Serbia program who are in attendance today. So we had some workshops on continuing professional development, and we used the opportunity to develop a guide. Now it's only available in English at the moment, but depending on the interest we get, we will hopefully be able to translate it into Russian. I think it's very important, continuing professional development. As we know, in many countries, the initial qualification program, qualification is a great and important tool, but as countries adopt new standards and regulations, whether in accounting or audit or others, you can't ask people who've been in practice for 10 or 20 years to go back to university or even to write a professional exam. And usually there's what we call grandfathering involved. And so obviously, then continuing professional development for existing members and qualified practitioners has a very important part to play. And of course, you cannot ask a 40 or 50-year-old to sit through a classroom as you would a 20 or 25-year-old on an undergraduate program. And so I hope this guide will help people understand why and how continuing professional development should be implemented. So now I'm going to go a little bit more over the resources, a couple of them in particular, the competency-based guide, the competency-based accounting education training and certification guide, which I mentioned. This was introduced in Vienna, as I said, at the launch. But I think it's important, as we have some new members today, and certainly I'm sure some of us may have forgotten, and the fact that it wasn't available in Russian at the time. So let me go over this guide one more time. And again, the interest is pretty broad. It's not just for universities and PAOs, but certainly I think regulators and ministries of education, other policymakers may find some interest in the guide because it is very broad. And again, recognizing that importing solutions has its limitations and countries need to come up with their national plans. And so that's what we hope this guide will facilitate in terms of developing the competencies of people who need to have them, whether they're accountants, auditors, regulators, etc. So we broke down the process through stages. And again, this publication took several stages and went through a very thorough review process to get feedback from different people. And I think the initial stage was interesting because we kind of added it as an afterthought. It was, well, these are all the things we need to do. But then as we talked with different people and got feedback on the guide, it was like, well, yes, but you first need to evaluate where you are. Are you really embarking on this massive program of competency-based education without assessing what resources you have, what's your regulatory background, political will, let's call it that, and before embarking on these different stages? So that's what we do in the phase 0, and obviously budget is a consideration, as we know. Nothing gets done without the right resources. So once this is done, and there is both the availability and the commitment, keeping in mind resources can also be the volunteers and the time, and a lot of people here have demonstrated that it's not just about money to buy or translate things, but it's also the free giving of your own time as members of the accounting profession. So the first stage then looks at the establishing the competency framework. Again, very important that people don't, as much as we love the ACCA and ICAW and I love the CPA Canada program, it's a mistake to think, well, country A has adopted international standards, we've adopted international standards, therefore we'll just translate the program of country A. I think that has a great value, and certainly at the initial level and at the lower level. But I also think it's very important from a regulator's point of view, and I know there are some regulators with us today, to look at what is needed, because the needs, the capacity, and the legislation, when I look at, for example, being familiar with the education programs in France and in the UK, which can both members of the, well, until recently anyway, members of the European Union, adopting a European common content, adopting international standards. And yet when I look at the training that you would get as a qualified accountant or auditor in France and in the UK, you may have the same competencies at the end, but the way to get there is very different. So I think that's what this is about. It's about, okay, what competencies do we need and at what level and for whom? And that is a big process. And this guide sort of highlights how you can do that, but also I think it would really be useful because it also gives you some shortcuts. How can I use what's already been done, but then adapt it? Because of course, when you consider the process, consultations, starting with a blank sheet, of course, nobody is going to do that. You have your own program, you have international benchmarks that of course you're going to look at. But I really think now, especially now that it's in Russian, you will find this very useful. So once this is done, we then look at the gaps. So having determined what exists, what do we currently have? And again, some countries will, as the benchmarking tool has proved, realize, well, actually, we are already doing a lot of the things we need to do. So what are the gaps? And the gaps, I think, both there is the content, and we certainly looked at that in through the benchmarking tool, but it's also in, let's not forget, we're looking at competencies. So when a young professional isn't someone who is just capable of doing some calculations and making a decision on an audit report, for example, but who's able to interact with colleagues, who's able to communicate, who has technological skills. And so I think that affects, the gap is not just about the programs, but it's also about delivering those competencies, and that then impacts not just the curriculum, but also the examination, the teaching methods, the teaching resources, etc. So I think, again, I think this guide will be useful as you go through this process, and some of you already have, of course, and some of you are at different stages of the journey. But of course, the change is constant, and you know, I'm amazed when I look at how the program, for example, in Australia has evolved, the CPA program, which I took, over 20 years ago, and when I look at the program today, I can tell you the practices of 20 years ago would not qualify as best practices today. You know, you cannot really demonstrate communication skills if you achieve your whole qualification through multiple choice exams. So these are some of the questions that we need to look at beyond just the curriculum. And then implementation, and certainly we appreciate there are resources and needs of involvement, and so going back again to the initial stage where, you know, if this is a long journey, and so you need to make sure you have the political will, the champions to support this program, this process, and then the resources to see it through. And again, I think you'll find the guide is great because, you know, it helps you get an idea of the scope, and maybe there are some shortcuts we can take, maybe piloting, maybe biting one piece at a time, rather than having great goals to change everything and then falling short. So once we finish this guide, you know, another process need that, again, the EDUCOP members expressed an interest in was to look at resources. You know, because we know it's not just a matter of what the curriculum we have, but it's also about the teaching. We felt it was very important to support that. Now we're focusing very much through this resources guide on teaching and training. And so what we, in a way, it's complementary, because of course you can look at competencies, but then you say, okay, we need to impart these competencies. Great, we understand we need to be able to help the auditor form a judgment on the audit opinion. How exactly do we do that? How does that translate into course material, into classroom exercises, into examinations? And so this is what this guide was aimed at doing. It's in draft form, but I don't believe it's going to change. I'm actually working on the process of updating it based on the feedback we've received at the moment with an expert. But a lot of it will remain the same. So I felt it was important to make it available to you in Russian today, as 95% of the guide is already there, and then, but we won't put it on our website until it's fully available. And one of the things which I wanted also to do with the guide, because I think it's one of the areas of weakness that I find in many countries, which is the, and again, CPA Australia, sadly, was an example, which I'm pretty sure has been remedied, but until fairly recently did not have this capstone business case, which is the top of the pyramid. The idea being that, so the guide will have resources that leverages finance, it leverages management, accounting, information technology, and auditing. But then the concept of integration. And the example, when I took this exam, there was a similar examination in Canada when I qualified in Canada. And a simple way of putting it, this final exam, even though it's changed over time as well, was the conversation with a client. So, you're meeting a client and the client has a new business strategy or a challenge, and you're meeting them for a coffee in your favorite cafe, assuming the cafe has now reopened, and the client brings you this problem. So you're not going to have your calculator and your finance table or your tax tables or your audit rules or the information you would need for that anyway. But you're able to reflect on the challenge from the financial point of view, the audit point of view, maybe conflict of interest, corporate governance, and maybe some ideas about finance as well. And so that's what a professional is not someone who is an expert and who can do very complicated exams in specific areas, but is someone who is able to bring that knowledge together. And so we assume that happens, and it does happen over time as part of work experience, but it's important for professional accountancy organizations in particular, even though this integration work can start earlier at university, to start testing, imparting those skills and then testing them as well. And so as I'm running out of time, I will now quickly skip over to the final publication, which is the CPD guide. As I mentioned, it's only available in English. Hopefully the STAREP and CAREP programs will be able to access a Russian version in the near future. But CPD, as I mentioned early at the beginning, and I have this graph to look at all the education standards, which a lot of you will have already seen, but continuing professional development, it can be a key tool for delivering the skills that previously qualified accountants and auditors don't already have. But it isn't a matter of just repeating what would be done in the classroom. And certainly grown individuals also need to think about their own development. So the philosophy of training is very different. People should actually take an active part in their continuing professional development. And, I remember being asked a few years ago about someone had done a master's in finance, and the PAO was asking me, would that count as CPD? We didn't really think that was relevant. And well, again, it's going to depend on your membership and your codes, but a qualified accountant may find that having a master's in finance is what they need to better serve their specific clients. And so for me, that would be probably in terms of hours, they're going to exceed the minimum requirement. And so that certainly would be valid CPD from that person's point of view. Again, this depends on the regulatory needs and the legal environment, and that's what this guide does. It's sort of, if you look at the international education standards, they're great. They provide an overview how do you then construct that? How do you then develop rules? How do you then develop materials, examinations? But mostly we're looking at the governance and the implementation of continuing professional development. So that's what this guide does, and it breaks it into different areas such as policies, content, administration, and effectiveness to help you, again, not necessarily cut and paste the rules from another organization, but consider how those rules can be adapted to your own needs. So to finish off, I'd like to, again, to thank everyone. It's been a great journey to be part of this STAREP EduCop. And so I hope, you know, you will have found some of these workshops and resources useful. Of course, the meeting is an important part, and certainly you've built those connections over time, and hopefully that can continue. As you know, the sharing knowledge and resources of people with similar minds and similar challenges is very important. But as one of my predecessors said, you know, you will get out of these workshops what you put into them. So I encourage you to continue remaining involved online and offline. And just to finish off with this author and this book, which I very much enjoyed, on the importance of accounting. The balancing of books still provides a dramatic language of financial morality, with numbers telling stories of riches and ruins and hiding them. As I strongly believe, in spite of the changes that technology brings and the changing of the jobs, there is and will continue even more so under these circumstances to be a very important role for accounting and therefore accounting education. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would like to hand over to back to Lucia and Olga, who are now going to give us an overview of the ACCA program. Also wanted to mention that even though we have a question and answer session at the end, I believe Lucia, Olga, and Elena will take a small number of questions at the end of each session so that you're able to get immediate feedback. So thank you very much for your patience, and handing over to Lucia.
Thank you very much, Alfred. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, I can certainly hear you.
That's great. And thank you. That was very interesting for me also to familiarize myself a little bit more with the great work that you've been doing in the STAREP program. So thank you for that. I'll only spend a few minutes before I pass off to my colleague, Olga. But we wanted to have the opportunity to introduce ACCA in the context of some of the innovations that we're doing and also our role in the region. So I'll do that for the next few minutes, and then I'll pass on to Olga. I think many of you don't need an introduction to ACCA. We've been working with you, but also in my welcome speech, I did refer to a little bit of our footprint. So I just wanted to put it in the context of that map that you see there on the screen. And really, rather than talk about the extent of the number of members or students and the number of countries, it's really to put across, this is a network that is available. It's a network of professionals that are trained to the same global standards, to future members that are working towards that, many of them going through the institutions that you're part of, and really working across the globe. We have offices in over 110 countries, and again, this is also not only to tell you the footprint that ACCA has, but also to make our own people, almost 1,700 people across the globe, available to our partners and to our partnerships. I mentioned before that is really the ecosystem of educators and employers that make professional bodies successful, because if we're able to then give them the skills, the competencies that are required, then employers are going to obviously want that. And ACCA works very closely with employers, over 8,000 of them actually now across the globe, to ensure that what we bring it's not only appreciated, but that they are actually really in touch with what they want. So we work very closely with global and local employers to ensure that the competencies that they're looking for are fully embedded in our program. And as I mentioned before as well, working through learning partners, but also professional bodies, forming strategic partnerships. So these numbers is just to give you a sense of that network. We also wanted to reflect in the region that you're all part of and that you're coming from. And if thank you, Olga. The next two slides is not to dwell on the numbers, but it's to just give you a sense that in this country, and you're from not only these countries, but also from the institutions that we work with, there's a direct correlation of the number of members and future members that we have with the number of learning partners, with a number of accredited institutions that we work with. And this is something that we're very keen to ensure that not only we maintain, but we increase in terms of the collaboration. Being able to actually have accredited programs means that future members are able to make the most of their academic and their professional qualifications, and also employers are actually want to have them at the early stage of their journey of becoming a professional accountant, and that all coming together is really the confluence of knowledge, of skills and competencies building together. So we're very keen to continue to build that. For us to be able to do that, ACCA is very conscious that one of our USPs is ensuring that we continue to innovate, and that's been one of the values that we've had from actually the beginning of our history in 1904. The latest innovations that ACCA has done goes back to 2016, where we had a significant change in our curriculum. Not only we went to a further flexible approach of having 4 sessions a year, but also we've started the journey of making the majority of our exams, and we're still in that journey. But now 9 of our 13 exams are computer-based exams, and we are at the beginning of making our strategic professional exams also part of our computer-based exams, which then allow us to actually, in a situation like we find ourselves in at the moment, really accelerate the next innovation. And we're very excited about this at the moment. We were actually looking to do this in the next 2 to 3 years, but not to waste a good crisis. We've brought remote invigilation and to the forefront. And in fact, today we're holding the first of our on-demand CBE exams by remote proctoring. So we'll be able to share with you in the coming days how it goes. But we're very glad that we'll be able to offer exams to students on demand, but also of our session exams in June and July, and then more widely from September. So these innovations don't go without a lot of work to ensure that the continued rigor and integrity of our exams is actually the same as if they were taking place in exam centers. But we are very glad to say that this is where we're going towards. The last thing I wanted to say about our innovations is that more than ever before, and as I was saying, as we move to a more digital environment, whether it's CPD, whether it's certifications, on the area of digitization is something that we are absolutely building, and we're seeing a huge amount of interest, whether it's in cybersecurity, robotics, or machine learning. A lot of these are in English, and I know that many of you have both languages, but we really invite you to look into those. And the last innovation that we're very excited to bring to you, and very relevant for this region, is our ACCA Advanced Diploma in Russian language. This was actually launched last year in June of 2019, and it's really a way for ACCA to demonstrate the commitment, the long commitment that we have to this region. It really encompasses the applied skills and knowledge exams of the ACCA qualifications. So it's exactly the same syllabus, but in Russian, and it's offered and available in 12 Russian-speaking countries. And again, just in the same manner, we are committed to ensuring that the rigor and the quality is maintained. And I want to emphasize that this comes with a complete support infrastructure, and this is what is really taking us over the last 18 months, is building accredited materials, ensuring that we have learning provision, that we have trained the trainers in place, that we have all the technical backup articles and materials, and that we have an extensive exam center network. As well as all the other resources that we would have normally in our English exams. And with that, I'm going to pass on to Olga, who is also going to introduce our team on the ground, who is also on the line. Over to you, Olga.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lucia. Hello, everyone. Very, very happy to meet everyone virtually. And I would also like to say a special thank you to the Centre for Financial Reporting Reform for giving us this opportunity to speak to you about ACCA and our innovations. And before we move on to the next session, and before I get to the main ACCA contacts, I would like to run a quick poll to make this an interactive session as well, and to get your opinions. You will see on your screens soon a couple of questions that I would like you to take a couple of minutes to think about and provide your answers. You would probably be able to see those questions in the polls tab on your right. So please take a minute to read the questions and provide your answers, and we'll have a quick discussion of them in a minute.
Dear Olga, I'll quickly chip in. I published just the question: have you ever cooperated on joint initiatives with ACCA? And I would like the participants to answer the question. And we have the Russian version of the same question for Russian-speaking participants. Сотрудничали ли вы ранее с ACCA? Для русскоговорящих, пожалуйста, ответьте на русский вопрос. For English speakers, please. Both questions are the same, just in different languages. I'll now add the next question, again in two languages, two separate questions. It is the same question, but two separate questions in Russian and English.
There is a message, the delegates need to click on polls button with the red dot.
Okay, do we have the results of the polls? I'll stop sharing for just a minute.
Dear Olga, I'll once again repeat for our participants. Please, everyone, press the pause button on the right-hand side, and you will see 4 questions, 2 in Russian, 2 in English, and there is a small arrow on the right side of the question. If you click it, you see the drop-down answer section. Please select answer and submit. If anyone has a problem with it, please write a message to me in the message box, and I'll be happy to assist. Thank you, Olga, and please let me know when it's time to finish the poll and publish the results.
Yeah, let's give it another 30 seconds, I think, and we can have a look and discuss the results of the poll.
Okay, thank you, dear Olga.
Okay, so Terry, can we have a look at the results of the polls? I hope everyone had an opportunity to provide the answers.
Thank you, dear Olga. I will publish now results, and you will be able to see them in poll results section.
Okay. Yeah, so let's have a look at the results. Quite excited here. So the first question was about cooperation. Have you ever cooperated with ACCA before? And it's brilliant to see that the majority is saying yes. The vast majority, that's wonderful. That's really good news for us because it just emphasizes the fact that we are determined, we're committed together through partnerships to support the finance profession in the region, to develop it together. So I'm really, really glad to see that sort of resolve. So thank you very much for pointing that out. And the second question was about the details of that cooperation. So what type of events or initiatives were you part of or run together with ACCA? And looking at the results, bit of everything, to be honest, but I think the winner is accreditation of university programs. I guess that's understandable. We have a lot of university representatives joining us here today. And again, that's wonderful to see because accreditation of university programs is one of the key instruments ACCA has in building partnerships across the region and investing into higher education to ensure that the financial profession has the right people joining it after they graduate and taking the knowledge and the best practice that they have learned in universities forward. So thank you very much for sharing your views. Thank you very much for taking the time for the polls. Very good results. Makes me very happy because I take direct part in accrediting universities, so that's very nice. And today's session is going to be focused around university work ACCA does. So the session that we're going to have next is actually about the details and the considerations that need to be taken into account when a university makes a decision to accredit its degree programs. So you'll have some insights about the mechanics of it, things like qualification structure, assessment, and marking. So I hope you find that very, very useful for those who have already accredited programs at the universities and those who are thinking about it. And without further ado, I will introduce the team on the ground here in the region who will be providing support to you and answering the questions today during the session after we complete the main part of the session, and also going forward. These are the people that you can always get in touch with, ask your questions, share your views. We're here to listen, we're here to help you. So let me go back to sharing my screen so you can see who are the key persons in the region. And most of us here on the call today, Vera Starodubtseva, who is the portfolio head for CIS Plus countries, and Vera is joining us here. Altin Shakirkhanova, who's head of ACCA in Kazakhstan and Central Asia. Janette Onishuk, head of ACCA Ukraine and the Caucasus. And all three ladies are here with us today. Andrea Stanchu, who unfortunately hasn't been able to join us, and she's head of ACCA Southeastern Europe. And myself, Olga Akimova, the regional head of education. And we will be here till the end of the session. Please use this opportunity to ask us questions and to share your views. We'll be very, very happy to hear. So without taking any more time, I know we have a lot to go through. I will pass the floor to my colleague and an ACCA financial reporting examiner in the Russian language, Елена Slobodskaya. Елена, please, the floor is yours, and I will stop sharing the screen.
Спасибо, Ольга. Добрый день, коллеги. Я рада вас приветствовать.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm glad to greet you. I'll try to share my screen. Now it works. So, dear colleagues, our next 1.5 to 2 hours will be discussing more specifically ACCA course, financial reporting. And our mission is not to teach you how to train your students in the subject, but rather to share some ideas and advice how to make the course more useful to your students, how to help them find the resources which are often have quite wide range, but not all students and teachers know about the resources. We'll try to take the example of financial reporting to introduce the resources, the capacities provided by ACCA to us. As we mentioned earlier, ACCA offers the opportunity to students to take exams in Russian language. And since this year, financial reporting course will be available in Russian. I am the examiner on this subject in Russia. Also, my main activity is audit. I work in Big Four company. Over the last 15 years, I was checking financial reporting of the clients, and I consult them on preparing financial reporting. So I hope that my experience and my knowledge will help you. Will give you the opportunity to ask questions which are of interest for you for a long time, and also I will try to use my experience to make this course more beneficial too, and to share as much as possible some ideas and developments and advice. What we're going to discuss today, we will have the following 4 parts of our workshop. After each part, I will have the chance to answer your questions, but during my presentation, you can use the functions of questions and We'll stop after each part and we'll answer your questions. So what are we going to discuss for the next 2 hours? We're going to discuss, as I said, we're going to discuss some advice, some ideas which will help you in case if you teach financial reporting course. Again, we're using it as example. Any course of ACCA, for any ACCA course, this advice will be helpful. Also, we'll discuss what are the resources available for you as trainers, what are the resources available for students, where they are, how to find them quickly. Maybe for some of you it will be the news that many resources are available in Russian and the base is growing every day. They're very beneficial. And we'll have some brief discussion at the end on how to grade the results of the tests, of the exams. Often students, especially in the beginning of the way in ACCA, students feel very uncertain after standard education in our countries. It's hard for them to change, to understand how the logic works of checking the ACCA exam, how to prepare for ACCA exam. Our task is to explain the students specifically the logic and technique. So we'll discuss this at the end of our session. In order to have more confidence, in order to give students more confidence, you have to understand well how the course works, how our financial reporting course works, what is the structure of the course, what is examiner expecting from the exam, and this will enable you to provide support to the students. First, we'll discuss the content of the exam. I will be speaking mostly about financial reporting. Each exam has similar structure. It is quite logical, and always these materials can be seen at ACCA website, how the course is structured. Financial reporting course envisages that students will know conceptual regulatory framework of preparing financial reporting, the basic knowledge. Then they will be able to apply their knowledge in order to account financial transactions, financial activities, results in the reports, to prepare reporting. The most difficult and cross-cutting section of the course is analysis and interpretation of financial reporting. This is this part which provokes the most questions and difficulties among students. So we'll focus on this more specifically. The exam on financial reporting course consists of 3 chapters, A, B, and C. And we'll discuss each chapter more specifically, again, in order for you to have understanding how the course works, and you can transmit this to your students. Overall, the exam lasts for 3 hours. It consists of 3 chapters. Chapter A consists of 15 questions that require 1 answer, yes or no, correct, incorrect. Chapter B has 3 situational assignments, exercises with questions requiring 1 answer, and each assignment has 5 separate questions. To examine this chapters A and B, we can examine any theme of the course. Any theme can be included. And chapter C is the most difficult for the students. As I said, it includes 2 exercises, comprehensive exercises, which would require broad answer from the students. And in the majority, this chapter would require application of knowledge that students may have and formulation of analysis of reporting. This is the point which provokes doubts and worries of the students. I'd like to discuss simpler chapters first, chapters A and B. Chapter A, as I said, covers questions on any themes of the training program. The variations of how the questions are asked may be different. For example, there may be 1 correct answer which should be chosen, or several correct answers. Students may be required to choose correct statement according to standards or incorrect statement if the exam is in computer-based mode and this mode is available in the ACCA. Then there are some gaming moments. Students have the chance to use computer technologies, for example, not just form or answer A, B, or C, but drag and drop some items in diagram, for example. You can represent some, you can use some words to make some definition or statement from the standards, and the assignments in the question will be you have to use your mouse to move some items. For the current generation, this is entertainment, and this is reducing the stress of the exam, because the exam is the stress for any individual. And there are maybe different formats. Computer-based format allows to make some interactive approach in these questions.
Плюс-минус формат точно такой же. Единственное, что в разделе Б сначала идет задание, потом...
The format remains the same, but in this chapter you'd have tasks and questions for every assignment. And questions might not be related, but or separate from the whole scenario. They could refer to some standard or some part of the standard, and student, when they start answering that set of questions, they can go to different parts without special order. Also, there is a task where student will have to make calculation using calculator, but calculations in that part would not be very hard. The chapter C, section C, would be harder. That's application of knowledge the students have and certain skills and ability to judge. Experts would be the ones judging the answers. They need to understand standards, and they need to have relevant approaches in answers of each student. And in next hour, we'll talk about helping students forming their response in a way so that their relevance would be sufficient, but the structure of answer should be in a way that team of experts will find the right answer very expediently, so that will help them pass the exam. Section C has questions related to preparation of financial report and interpretation. What is meant here? First, preparation. Student can find necessity to prepare reporting for single organization or group of companies, and in limited time. We don't expect full report. Examiner would not require full report, but some excerpt, some part of reporting or correction to certain indicators reported. But if we're talking about the group, that would be full report, but not as detailed as real report of the company. Such questions include more complicated questions. For example, prepare the summary of cash flow for this organization. And that's not an easy report. That's F7 level. So a simpler types of reports are already tested in earlier stages of the program. In this course, in this subject, students will have to demonstrate much deeper ability to understand, for example, cash flow, like applying the new standard on lease or issuing securities, promissory notes, something more complicated. And we need to show students that, yes, you have knowledge of reporting in a simpler way, but you need to go in deeper, more narrow standards and be able to prepare to use them in your reporting. And then something that is very scary for the students. And we want to give them more assurance as they prepare. This section is related to interpretation. When students need to apply their knowledge, but not just. They also need to comment activity of the company or group of companies according to numbers that they see. We expect that this interpretation would be very specific. We expect that students will not give just template phrase. If the turnover of resources increase, that's not so good. They need to take their knowledge and apply their knowledge of the standard to a specific company to see what has happened and as reported in scenario and what can happen in the future based on these indicators. That requires knowledge of standards, but also ability to apply them. This is a course where we teach our students to prepare them for exams. We need to teach them how to analyze data. I think I already spoke a lot. Let's try do a poll again. Eteri, could you help me, please? I'll go away from presentation. I'll go into polls. It's similar to what we already had. Will be in 2 languages. I see it's in 2 languages. Would you please answer what are most common mistakes, most common errors leading to students fail on exam? At exam, you can choose your answer, or several actually, because there are several errors that students might make. I see questions came up. Please choose your language of preference.
Так как вопрос у нас один, предлагаю еще минут, секунд 15.
15 more seconds because we have only one question first. Eteri, let's look at the result. We don't yet see. Now we do. I see the results.
Ведь у не всех получилось сразу разобраться. А, нет, в русском реально. Прошу прощения, да, вижу.
I see Russian set of answers and English set of answers.
Не используется информация сценария, победивший вариант. Также из популярных неструктурированных ответов не указан ход выполнения.
Lack of structure, lack of working in calculations, not usage of information in scenario. Thank you for showing those answers because they're most common errors actually. I'm going back to presentation. Okay, you've heard my main message for our today's meeting, that very often students offer a standard response, a template response, a general response. Consolidated reporting is reporting of the group that would include this, that, and other thing. Something very general that we see in response. But actually, the scenario is very specific, and they could give some details from the scenario. In addition to general analysis of the situation, scenario shows additional facts that should be included in their response as argument for that response. Also, I'm happy that you've noticed this very common difficulty, that students do not show the working of their calculation, to show the answer. ACCA has a rule that confuses our students sometimes. They have not studied in similar qualifications as ACCA. If a student showed proper logic, but during multi-layer calculation, they have allowed mathematical error, our traditional education system would fail the grade on this question. But ACCA has a different rule. If the student shows the working of their calculation, the logic of their response, and there is a mistake in the middle or at the end, either with a step or arithmetics, then there will be some points remaining. Some would be lost for the mistaken step. But examiner needs to see the full effort of the student, and so we need to show the working. In written exams in the past and in the written exam or orally explained, this is the following of steps. Or at computer, you could show these formulas and steps, and examiners, as they look at the calculation, they can go deep into the formula, see the workings. That's good. But students might lose important points if they don't show the workings of that calculation. The points related to calculations are very simple. It's either there or not. Some calculations might have several steps. If you have several, you might be mistaken in one step and keep the points for the correct steps. Other mistakes that I'd like to point out: in consolidating reporting due to stress or lack of knowledge, students lose important information related to operations that happened not at the beginning of period or at the end of period. There is a strange practice for companies to do their significant operation on reporting date on 31st of December or 30th of June. That seldom happens. Groups of companies would have operations at any period. And so in consolidated reporting, students need to remember about the scenario and the dates listed there. There are points in consolidated reporting. The policy of reporting could be different in mother company and subsidiaries. And student needs to understand what kind of reporting we're talking about. Individual reporting or consolidated, and act accordingly. In computer exam, there is functionality to show the logic of your calculations, and you need to use that functionality. For what students see and what stops them from passing exam successfully. In computer exam, if a student, before he came to exam, never tried the functionality of the exam, if they have not gone through the training of those assignments, if they don't see how the system works, if they have not seen how the screen works, then it adds stress because the time is limited, information is huge. And if in the past the student has not seen functionality, then that's additional stress for not being prepared to set up, and that causes a fail sometimes. So we do recommend to students, if you have this opportunity in training students, give them exam to practice on. ACCA or providers show this training system, and every student can learn functionality of the exam. Before we go to some questions, I'd like to talk about resources. We talked a lot about many different resources available for teachers of ACCA subjects, but also for students. But not everybody knows those resources. They don't know where to find them or how to use them. So our task as professors to show the students how to use these resources and to convince them how important they are. Let's start with resource available for you, for the educators who help students prepare for exams. That's a education hub. That's a portal of educational resources that has most recent information on ACCA, on the news of ACCA, advice, ideas, recommendations, any teaching material that might be useful to you or that would be necessary for you as you prepare your students for exam. If you have not seen this portal before and you have no login access, then please contact myself or Olga or anyone from ACCA who is present here to give you access. All materials are accessible and there is regular update. These materials are accessible to you and to your students. There are references in presentation and materials of this presentation are sent to you in advance, or you can download them right now in document section. Huge part of materials already translated into Russian. We'll keep updating the database of resources in the translation. Of course, all of them are accessible for you in English as well. I'd like to point out materials that could be helpful to students, but they sometimes ignore. First, the syllabus and study guide. That's important. That's a must for any ACCA course. A student needs to understand the full picture, what they need to know in order to prepare for the exam. They also need to look at the typical exam. Student is prepared for themselves. They might not have understanding that there are of course, they know about normative documents, but they might not know how to specifically prepare to specific exam, how the questions would be formulated, what answers are expected. This could be seen only in a typical exam, in a sample. Of course, sample is accessible only in English at this time, but we will extend our database of resources, so please watch for updates. You seek other types of information. In the beginning of 2000, I was a student myself. In my preparation, my education was always accredited providers, but my preparation was limited to 4 points of this list, and I could feel much more secure in the exam if at that time I could know that there are more resources. And it's important to tell our listeners, our students now, that there are other resources available. For example, examining team guidance, how examiners team approach specific complicated topics, especially those that show the biggest problems with students, where students get least points. These topics are reviewed additionally, and there are reports about those reviews. Also, at the end of exam, there is a report. What was most difficult and what has to be reviewed if student has to pass this exam again. All these topics are shown at ACCA resources. Now, when we say that many exams are prepared as computer exams, it's important for students to see general instructions, how exams are prepared, how they're passed on computer, samples that could be understood, and also there is a training system how you could work with data in this program, how can you move certain objects to answer questions, because when you try out first, you have higher chance of passing the exam. So then, with all preparation technically, they could only work during the exam on the knowledge base. I'll go 2 slides back to show you the references, show you links. Please study those resources independently when you're preparing to meet the students, but also convince students to use those resources, share these links with them, because it's not enough to work on syllabus and study guide. It's good to go into more resources that would help our students. Let's make a pause now and maybe answer some questions that are already coming.
Не получилось.
I wanted to stop sharing the presentation and to look at the answers. I wanted to look at the questions, sorry. And you can look at pools. I have published them, the questions on the exams. We can look at this later. Terry, now I wanted to look at the questions. I can see questions from participants on Education Hub portal. You can apply to Olga Akimova, and you have her presentation. There are other contacts in order to get the login and access. Am I right, Olga? Yes, Yelena, I think it's all right. It's all correct. Please write me into the private chat, and as Yelena mentioned, we will open access for you for Education Hub. There is full set of resources, which Yelena just mentioned. Please write your name and email in the private chat. I see that Alona wrote to me. Alona writes to Olga in the same way, and then you'll get login and password. If there are other questions, please apply to us. And before we look at the pools conducted by Terry, I'd like to mention a few words on our course. Just a second. I would like to share my presentation again. For some reason, I cannot share it. Olga, can you help me? We cannot see the presentation yet. We can see you. Okay, now I understand. Thank you, Olga. Before we answer the questions included into the pool, I would like to discuss the structure of the course. We'll discuss your course when you train students for some subject. We discuss my course as the example, financial reporting course. Any course of ACCA consists of 3 parts, 3 major parts. The biggest one are the first 2, the training stage, when we share with students the theory of the course. Then we have a repetition stage, a revision stage, when we focus on the most important points. We try to create a structure in the heads of the students. And the last part, which is mock exam. This is optional part. It's not always implemented in the course, but we really recommend to use mock exam. We'll discuss later the reasoning for this. Let's keep some intrigue. Let's first discuss the structure. In general, we recommend that all 3 stages take about 4 months on average. Training stage is the longest, it's about 10 weeks, and revision is about 6 weeks. It depends on your specific plans, how often the students will be tested at examination sessions. ACCA has 4 sessions a year. If your students also come to sessions 4 times a year, 4-month course is impossible to produce in this case. In our company, for example, we don't allow our staff to take March session because we have active working process in this period. So we have the chance to have longer structures of the course in terms of time. It depends on you. I like to focus that training phase is the longest, and at the end, we recommend to have the mock exam for all students. We'll discuss later why it is needed. Before we do this, I'd like to go back to the pool. Terry already gave us the access to the pool results. On the right, we have the pool, the questions. You can choose your language. What is the most efficient way for the students to prepare for the exam, for any ACCA exam? Also, you can choose several options which you believe are the most beneficial, the most efficient. The question was not very difficult, I hope. Terry, let us look at the results. Can you show us the results, please? Elena, I have published the results already. Thank you. I can see them now. The winner is the option, the classes with accredited provider or self-preparation with support of the tutor. Thank you. Yes, we really support this option, which is the most popular. The classes with accredited provider. Statistically, we also do statistics in our company, and we see that if the students have to go to the class to sit in the classroom, they are involved into the discussion and discussing issues, and we all understand that the questions are related to analysis and interpretation are the most difficult. And it is quite difficult to develop the skill of answering these questions on your own without assistance of the classroom, without discussing with the trainer your ideas, your considerations, without attempts to structure, to present your answer for the analysis. If you just sit down in your home, if you do it online, you can write down some answer, but this is less efficient according to statistics and practice. Also, the popular answer is self-education, online education. This is quite efficient when the students do theory, the biggest portion. They study theory on their own, and then they use accredited provider or tutor to try to hone their analytical skills in direct conversation, online or personally. Modern young people usually choose online option or strive for it if they have the choice. We are the older generation, we convince everyone for personal classes. The time will show what is most efficient. As far as we see, statistically, personal classes show greater efficiency, so we suggest to stick to them. Now I'll try to go back to my presentation, and we'll continue discussing the course. We have looked at the structure. Now I would like to say a couple of words on what we envisage, what should be included into each stage of training, in revising what you should pay attention to when you prepare your program for the students. First, at the stage of training, this is clear. We have to we have to cover specifically, as much as time allows us, we have to cover all training program. It's clear we talk about 10 weeks, and this may be not enough in order to cover all the grounds, all the chapters, but at least to focus on the most difficult and key elements of the program in the course of this time. And as we discussed before, the training materials, if you understand that it is impossible if you don't have enough time to discuss all the points, including the key points, our task as trainers is to allow the students to find out and to recommend the resources and abilities they have for home education so that we can cover the most of the program. And also great part of training stage, although this is called training stage, and we assume that we'll be talking theory mostly to our students, but still we really recommend to include test exercises to develop real test cases which are contained in the textbooks of the providers, to include them into this part. First, to make difference, to start getting some ideas from the students, to start conversation with the students, for them to start at this initial stage to try themselves in analysis and interpretation of financial reporting and some indicators. I'd like to discuss the electronic format. We mentioned that there is a computer-based version of the tests of the exam financial reporting. Often when we talk about computer-based version, the students are frightened. They don't work with Excel program, they don't know complex formula. Our task is to reassure students to say that although the exam is complicated, it requires deep knowledge of the standards, but it is not assumed that the students will be required to know some difficult tables, some complex formula. It's enough to have basic skills of working with spreadsheets. Most students already have these skills, simple formula in Excel. Most our students already know that. During your course, you have to make sure that students understand how to enter simple formula of multiplying, division, and to urge them, if you have electronic-based, computer-based exam, you have to use this formula, because from the experience we see that some students continue, especially those who started on paper format. They remember their skill to write down specifically the formula in the text. They try to write the text in the computer-based format. This option is available, but it is less efficient. If we use computer option, it makes sense to use it fully, to use all the advantages and benefits to save time and to use formula. If students are worried that they will not see the formulas, that the examiner will not see the formulas, the examiner also understands basic formulas and basic skills of using spreadsheets. So even formulas in this format are a good option, and the examiner will credit the necessary grades. Also, for computer-based exam, what is important is we're all humans. The examiners and markers who test papers, they're also people, they're humans, and you have to make life easier for them. If you want to get more grades, you should make the work of markers simpler. If the task requires preparing some reports, for example, preparing the financial statement, part of indicators in the statement should be calculated in the exercise. It's clear that you can have beautiful reports, and then at the bottom you make calculations. What it means is when the examiner checks the paper, they'll have to scroll the list to report to calculation several times back and forth. If the task requires some brief comments for 2 grades, you have to scroll back and forth. This is inconvenient. This irritates people. Sometimes you may miss some useful arguments and you can lose a grade or 1 point or half a point. We recommend the students, although use computer-based formats, humans look at your work and they look at in the screen format. The more convenient is it for the examiner to read your work, the better it is for you. So you have to teach students to position the answer in a way that if the calculation is made, it should be done close. The comment should be very close. You should use all useful methods which allow us to put in place computer-based exam. It's not always to do this on paper, so we urge students to use all the efficient methods of computer-based exam. And for you as well, when you know that your students will take computer exam, you have to think in advance how you will practice this exam during your course. For example, some providers have the ability to show the screen, to show the projector, and to demonstrate in real time the calculations on the screen, or to show the positioning of answers on the screen. If you have the opportunity in your training center, if you don't have this opportunity in your training center, you need to think in advance how you show this on paper for the students, how to give this basic skills of positioning of answers in computer exam. This should be thought through in advance. We have discussed the format. Also, I'd like to discuss specifically the most difficult topics. In the pool, you answered, and we also believe so, that the most difficult topics are topics related to analysis, and they should be approached comprehensively so that students have the specific structured picture how they approach this chapter of the exam, which frightens many people. There is nothing new here. If you want to learn to answer comprehensive tasks in a structured way, your approach should be also structured. We briefly will discuss how we suggest to approach training students these exercises. First, we read the exercise. We give students the chance to read on their own, and when we read the question together with students, we focus their attention that we start reading the questions. We don't read the scenario, we read the questions. Often the students don't understand why do we read questions if we don't know what's the point, what's the story. But this is really important. Why? Because, as I said, there are some questions which do not require the knowledge of scenario. They may touch on any item of the standard, and the students can immediately write the answer without reading the scenario. Why it's important? Because it may so happen if the technique of taking exam, which we'll discuss later, if the student doesn't use it very well, the point of answering the question in C section, the student may not have enough time, and you may lose all possible grades that the student may get, or the students may try to get the simplest grades, and the simplest grades are the simplest questions which can be answered without reading the scenario, without wasting time for that, or simple calculations. The simplest calculations give the simplest grades at the exam. So you read with the students. First, you read the question to the scenario, then you read the scenario together, and immediately you teach student when they read scenario, They need to try to analyze in their heads what is the information and the scenario relates to the question they read. What is the information which is additional, and they will think about this separately. Is it necessary or not? Should it be taken into account in calculation? They should note what reporting indicators change. At the stage of first reading, they cannot give the answer that these changes to analyze why it changes, but they should take notes. This is the first skill of reading the reporting, that you look at the numbers and you take notes what changed, what did not change, and how the changes in numbers are related to scenario which you read. This is step 1. Step 2 is the biggest step and the most difficult step in training students. Why? Because our task as trainers is to teach the students to analyze, how to teach them. We have to make them, we have to provoke them to start the discussion, to express their views. Although sometimes in the classroom there are active students, but our task is to train not 1 or 2 students, but to train, to encourage all students, to show the analytical skills of all students. In order to do this, we need to initiate discussion. The students are afraid. They're afraid to make a mistake. They're afraid to look stupid, just like all of us. The greatest fear after the fear of death is the fear of public speaking. So this is the difficult step. What we recommend is not to be afraid of silence.
Никаких наводящих вопросов студенту. То есть попробовать.
We should not be afraid of their silence. We should not nudge them. Help them think, help them express their thoughts, and then explain to them that mistakes are good. At the stage of training, it's good. Students need to understand, as long as I think, as long as I go into certain direction when I read the scenario, I can change my course and I can move in the new direction next time. So it's very important to analyze the mistakes of students, raising their assurance. Please try more, to be more mistaken, to learn more. Of course, when audience is completely science, you can direct them to the right answer. But in our training program, in our company, sometimes we divide the whole audience into several groups. And most active students, 2 or 3 in each group. So we divide them among these subgroups. So they would be nudging their colleagues, their students, to study more, to move forward. That's how we are trying to pull the students into thinking process, discussion, and the whole process of learning. Next step 3, calculate the ratios. That's a very simple way. Develop methodology of calculations. If especially formulas are complicated, you need to show them. It's hard to explain formula in words, so you need to show the screen. How do you do the calculations? Or give them assignment at home. Show how you do the calculation, then let them do the calculation, and then you give them feedback. As long as students keep calculating different coefficients and show those coefficients in reporting. Consolidated reporting, things get even more complicated, and we need, as trainers, to show students that if financial activity is for a certain period of time, for a group of companies or certain company, the events are happening throughout the period, and those all instances should be viewed together. But also it's important to differentiate between consolidated and individual reporting. And students need to look at dynamics. What else I wanted to show about coefficients? Another important rule of ACCA, we don't deduct points for the wrong thoughts. We just add points for all correct thoughts. What it means, if student miscalculates a certain coefficient at exams, if certain steps were done in the wrong way, but they have still analyzed the situation properly, the points would be accredited. Even coefficient is calculated properly. There's analysis about that show that the coefficient should grow, but calculation shows decreased coefficient. As long as logic is correct, the points will be gained, even if the numbers are wrong. People need to focus on the right process. The numbers are correct, should be correct, of course. Everything needs to be proper, but the logic and analysis should be given enough time, and that's an important process. Next steps. We read the question, we discussed first ideas, analysis of the first thoughts, we have calculated the coefficient, and the last step is a step, or the one before last, is preparing this analysis, writing the analysis and preparing the response. I was a student myself. I had this trouble myself. Students do not want to spend time during the course on this issue. It's not online course. If it's time with tutor, they are lazy to write some texts because everything seems clear. We've read everything at step one. We have discussed, we have calculated coefficients, but here we are very strict. We are very insistent, I should say, in what? The experience shows that even if everything seems to be simple and logical, we cannot avoid the skill of writing, because you can have ideal logic in your hand, but when you start putting up paper, it's hard to find arguments for relevant course of scenario. And that's how exam is tested. For every just statement, for every logical argument, you get a point. So the task of the student and our task as instructor to learn and to teach, structuring the answer in such a way that it would not just have general phrases, but will have comprehensive argument pertinent to scenario. Of course, students need to understand what parts are most important in scenario. Time is limited in every exam of ACCA, so students should focus on the key thoughts. And these ideas should go into computer or on paper in the first lines. That's how you don't lose important points. If you practice on easy questions, A and B section, the answers are very direct, so it's simple. You just give them proper answers, or you let them announce proper answers. And whether you check their answers or they check each other, it's easy. You can give the direct feedback immediately. But in issues related to analysis, that would be part C, financial reporting. There are such chapters in ACCA. You have to spend time on analysis, writing down, and you have to spend this time in the course. We insist that it should be part of the course. If you see that your time is limited in your course, or you're running out and you want to touch upon many topics in this format, we recommend to make a structure so that the student could use this plan for more detailed arguments. But as long as you go through the framework with student so they can structure the answer properly, you will be good. It has to be done in the training period first. As much time as you have in the course, give this procedure as much attention as possible. Don't push them to the right answer. Don't guide them. Help them less and give students more time to answer. It seems very simple, right? But in reality, there's huge opposition of writing the analysis down, opposition from the students. I'd like to stop for your questions, if you have any. Another important point, a tip, advice from experienced student. And we are teaching many students in our company as well. This very hardware advice, what you don't need to do for ACCA exam. Don't read the questions of previous exams, questions from accredited companies. Questions and answers in one manual, please don't read those. What does student do? They would read a question. They try to consider the answer for 2 minutes in their head. They think that it's enough. Very clear, very logical. They read the answer, logical and clear. That's how I thought anyway. And student has this false feeling, a false expectation that exam is easy. And you don't have to go deeper in analysis and preparation. Students don't go. They think, if I read 100 of those questions and 100 of those answers, then I'll understand the logic of the exam and I'll pass. The question is logical and the answer is logical, but you cannot just learn by watching. Because when they try answer those questions without reading them and then compare the answers students give to answer that manual gives, then that's where the difference will be. So we, as instructors, need to help them go through the process, read them the question, help them answer, and then compare the final answer to the answer is given. That's the process that would help ensure successful passing of the exam. Okay, this is what I recommend. We have to make a break according to our agenda. Let's make 10 minutes break. But if you would like to ask a question, please write it in the chat because I will be responding immediately after the break. So 10 minutes break. We have a break now, but please prepare your questions. Write them down in chat now, and we'll prepare them. Prepare those answers either in 5-7 minutes after each session or at the end of the whole training. Please write down your questions, and we'll try to answer them or at least touch upon them. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anara. To answer the question of Mr. Berezovsky, there will be a link, but it will come only a couple days after this event. When we get this video processed, then we'll share it. We are the organizers of the WorldBank. I'm trying to translate the questions right away. There was a question from Jon Hooper. In English, for Russian speakers. The question was translated in chat for all the participants. There is another question coming in from Natalia Lohanova. Mr. Berezovsky, please. Colleagues, while everyone is coming back, after this break, maybe we could answer the general question.
While the colleagues are coming back from the break, maybe we can discuss some general questions, like the question on the portal. Yes, colleagues, just a second. I will find all the questions which we received. I will start with the question of Nursultan on grants and scholarships, and I will tell you about Education Hub, which is very interesting to all. It will be beneficial to all to know about this as regards the support, grants, and scholarships to get ACCA qualification. In this classical form, the grants and scholarships are not available, but periodically we have special offers which give financial support to students within registration for the qualification. In essence, this is the discount. As we, as an organization, we do not do training. Our partners, training centers, perform the preparation for the exam, and across all the region, they have discounts for the courses which can help the students to prepare financially with the training center. Accordingly, from the perspective of financial side of the issue, these are two main instruments: the partnership discounts and help from us during registration with the help of discounts, and periodically we also have quizzes with a chance to win the textbook for the students, which also can help them with materials for preparation. As regards Education Hub, in essence, this is some portal which unites in itself a great number of resources to help trainers who teach the students to prepare for ACCA exam, or they teach at accredited programs of universities, which partially or fully includes ACCA exam programs. These resources are different from what is available in open access at our websites in Russian and English language. The information at the hub is more extensive, deeper, and more detailed. It includes the videos and webinars. It has the library of all webinars which were ever organized, everything that was available publicly. For example, our earlier webinars are still available at the library of Education Hub. The resource is very useful, but it is English language only. At this point, this information is available only in English. Some part of this information is being translated or repeated in Russian, and the similar hub will be available in Russian at the Russian language website of ACCA. We duplicate some information, but not all of information, because at Education Hub, all resources were stockpiled for decades, so the volume is huge. As the example, I'd like to mention there are exams of the past years, of many more years than the ones available at the website of ACCA, mock exams, trainers, video manuals, how to use different resources of ACCA. Recently, we launched the new instrument, which is called the Practical Platform, which allows the trainer to form the exams of ACCA type for their students. And the students are able to create test questions for themselves in the same way. At Education Hub, there is the series of videos how to use this resource, how it can be inserted into training, how to give the feedback and the results of interaction of the students and them taking the exam. These are more comprehensive instruments compared to what the website has to offer. I collect context from the chart. Everyone who sends you information, we will give you access to Education Hub. You will be able to see what's going on. We replenish the information all the time, and in the nearest time it will be updated by our main office. Just a couple of words on accreditation, how the process looks like. Can you give us brief information if you want to get accredited? It doesn't matter if it's national board or university, where can they apply and what's the sequence of steps and what are we looking at? Sure. The accreditation, what does it mean in principle? The accreditation of ACCA means that some parts of our programs of exams, maybe all of them, maybe part of them, maybe one of them is inserted into a training program of the university. For example, the classical option, accounting analysis and audit, the bachelor course, master's course, it doesn't matter. And some subjects are compared to ACCA program to make sure they are covered by ACCA by 80% at least. And during training, the students take ACCA exam program, and when they get the diploma of university, they can go to us and they can get exemption from this specific exam from this subject. The concept is that we say if the student took this subject at university and they want to continue training at ACCA, they don't have to retake the same subjects and to take another exam. They can do it during university curriculum. This is the concept of accreditation. The process is quite simple. There is the questionnaire. It's not the shortest, it's about 10 pages. It has to be filled in by the university representative who is responsible for the process. They have to attach the package of documents, which include the examples of exams. They can be the exams which are already used or are planned to be conducted. It is optional. You can send the example of exam, the program of the subject of the course, and training plan, training curriculum. And another paper is the scale of grades, how you're grading the passing or not passing of the subjects during training. And these 4 documents are provided to us. The contacts of persons were available earlier, and we'll share these contacts with all the participants so that you can see them. You can send everything to me in principle, and then we interact in trilateral procedure with the head office of ACCA in London. So there's the team in the main office reviews the documents, checks for compliance with the program and the format of ACCA exam, and issues accreditation of the university, which allows students to get exemptions. And the accreditation is some diploma, which can be put on the wall. And for 5 years, the duration of accreditation is 5 years. During 5 years, we interact, we meet, we visit you if you invite us to meet the students, to bring information sessions and master classes and so on. And over 5 years, after 5 years, the accreditation has to be updated. During 5 years, we don't do any audits. We don't sit at exams, we don't listen to lectures. If you invite us, we'll be pleased to do this, but in principle, this is not the requirement, it is not envisaged. If you're interested, if you think about this, If you never encountered this earlier, please write me. I will share the package of documents, the manuals, how to do it, what to do, how to adapt the training curricula for ACCA programs to be compliant by 80%, which I mentioned. So please write me. And also we'll have Q&A session after we finish the main part, and I will be ready to answer questions in more details, if any. And now I pass the floor to Yelena. Otherwise, I'm taking her precious time for the lecture. Thank you, Olga. We will have more time for Q&A. We see that you have questions. They're quite interesting. I would like to answer some questions myself. I would like to hear the answers to some of the questions. Let's discuss some more materials which are quite important. Some points of programs for the students are quite important. We discussed the training stage. Now I'd like to spend some time for the stage of revision of materials and to discuss the mock exam which we mentioned earlier. First, let's try the final pool for today. Once again, I invite you to open the pools section. It's also in 2 languages. The question is the following. It is related to efficiency of tactics of students. What do you think? The students who take the mock exam, what is the grades they get overall? We have our statistics, ACCA and big corporations. My company, we have the statistics. What do you think? The highest, who gets the highest grade? Those who take the mock exam, or they have lower grade, or the grades are the same? Please choose the right answer, which you believe is the most correct. And we will look at the results. Terry, please show us the results of the pool on the screen. We'll see. Yelena, can you see the results? Not at this point. The results are available. They're very eloquent in graphical modes in the bars. I cannot see them for some reason. Before that, I saw all the results. Maybe, Yelena, you have some problems. Maybe you can re-enter the system. You can close pools and you can open the pools once again. Now I can see it. It starts thinking. Our format is quite unusual today. So I have to study every day. I have to study new things. The old results disappear, but I still cannot see the new results. Colleagues, if you can see it, maybe you can present it for me. What is the most popular answer? And then I'll comment. This will be easier. Anara or Vera, can you comment? Can you say out loud the results of the pool? And then just a second. The first question is 30%. The grade is 30% higher for those who don't take mock exams. The most popular 5 to 10% higher grade for those who don't take the mock exam. The rest are the low ones. We just wanted to hear a voice now. I can see the results. Bingo. This is real statistics. You're quite right. On average, If we take the statistics of the big companies, the big corporates, or ACCA statistics, the results of the students is 5 to 10% better if they take the mock exam, and we'll discuss why. But before we discuss the mock exam, let's spend some time for the stage, the last stage before the exam, which is revision stage, when we revise all the learning material, when we do the revision course. Why is it needed? Why do we need revision course? If we don't do it, if we exclude it from the program for some reasons, in some situations we keep only the theory, we see that the results, the passing grade of the students is lower compared to the case when we have this course. The reason is trivial. It's obvious. The brain doesn't remember all the information from the first time. You're greater professionals in this than us, and you know that if students listen to some information and they don't apply it for the next time, over 1 month, 80% of information is forgotten. It disappears from the brain. You have to apply it immediately. As we say about the exam, about the subject, there is not always the chance to apply it if our students are not practicing in some area. How can you learn the material? You have to repeat it, and for this you need this revision course, which is the second part of our training. At this stage, we focus our attention on the key topics and we discuss the technique of passing the exam. If we remember how I did this in my time, when we were students, we took revision course in order to learn the technique, in order to listen our training, to learn the details, how the examiner, the specific subject, looks at their subject, sees the exam, what they expect from the students. What is the most important in the big program of the course, in the big textbook? The mission of the revision course is to create the picture, the structure for our students. Often the providers, especially accredited providers of ACCA, they give ready materials in the concise version for this course with key themes of the program, which should be the focus. Besides focusing on the key themes, the most of our course, revision course, will focus on practicing questions. First we discuss theory and then we practice. We give tasks for homework. During revision course we practice. We spend most of the time for comprehensive questions. A and B chapters have one answer and the student can see that their answer was wrong, so I need to read more on this theme, on this topic, to ask more questions. In comprehensive analysis and comprehensive exercises, it's more difficult. We need to develop practice of answering, and for us as trainers, we need to teach our students the technique. We discuss some points of technique, some points how to remember. That first we read questions, then we read the scenario, we identify the most important points, we provide the structure of the answer to the examiner, and then we'll discuss the tactics of details. The students, and me in particular, I wanted to get this for all the course that I passed at ACCA. One of the tactical points, this is the golden rule that you have to remember. It is the rule of time. It is assumed that when the examiner allocates the maximal number of grades for each question, this rule is taken into account. It is assumed that for every grade, which is maximal for the question, you're given 1.8 minutes. And from my practice, in order to facilitate the exam for myself, I have 1.8 minutes. I even reduced this time to save some time for the stress. Sometimes I cannot always stick to the time ideally, so that I have some time at the end of the exam to review all the booklets if we talk about paper form, and to make sure that all questions are covered. I took 1.5 minutes for the question. This rule should be solid in the heads of our students. I insist on this. I can see from the results of my students and in my company when we train.
Является именно неследование этому правилу. Почему? Потому
Very often, the reason for not passing is when student is responding, they feel enthusiasm, they know that they know. They have a lot of knowledge and they want to express all their knowledge. So if they don't strictly watch the time of response, you can spend a lot of time responding. In addition to template answer, they would give many arguments that would be repeating the key ideas of the students, and the students would be losing the points that they could get in answering simple questions. So they focus on one question and they lose points in non-responding to others. So 1.8 minutes, 1.5 minutes is my advice. That's what I recommend to students. When they see in the booklet the number of points per question, they need to calculate how much time we can spend per question, because we have only 15 minutes, and then if 15 minutes stop at half sentence, we stop and we move to the next issue. We already said, because the first key thoughts that come to your mind are most simple and they give the easy grades. But then logic and calculation, they give us simple calculation. The only way to bring all these simple points together in final grade, that's following simple but golden rule of time. And we are talking about this to students, man, a lot. When you hear this for the first time as a student, they don't understand. 3 hours for exam. You can write everything, anything in 3 hours. We will make time. But we as instructors, we need to explain the importance of this golden rule. And then I go section by section. So many marks, so many grades per section, and so many minutes. It's important for you to understand how the time should be divided. In the course of financial reporting, the answers that require specific answer, they're 2 marks each. But some questions are more complicated, and we need to explain that to students. Some require less text, some require more text. So 2 marks is average. 3 minutes per question. Students need to understand that they need to remember the total time per section. And they could go to easier questions first, mark them off, and then go into difficult questions. Some instructors advise to move all the complicated questions to the end altogether. If you're not having enough time for the easy questions, then you can guess. If you guess wrong, that would be 0. If you guess right, well, you have a chance. If you don't answer, that will be still 0. But if you get 1 out of 5, then you at least have 20% chance of getting it right. If 3 minutes are not enough, then you can move. But in my case, 1.5 minutes is a good solution going through the exam. Because at the end, it's important to have little time to review all the questions answered, to see that everything is answered correctly, but also that logic is shown so you don't lose simple points, easy points. When we have scenario in section B, one scenario and several questions, then the students should answer first the questions that do not relate to scenario, but for example, to a standard. And then they need to answer the question that is asked, actually, to answer the question that is asked, not the idea that student might have on the topic. If you don't have enough time, but you have multiple choice, then you guess if you have to write at least something in section C. We have studied specifically how to answer more complicated constructed questions. As we talk in general preparation, you looked at our statistics. The mock exam is very helpful. Usually students get 10% more on their grade if they were trying this exam before. Why this helps? Because even when they know the structure of the exam, they sometimes do not test all the tactics in real time. They might know tactics per section, but not altogether. And very often, students do not want to pass mock tests. They say, well, that's additional stress. They already have prepared enough. Or they say they have not prepared enough. And that's why they don't want to pass mock tests. But we disagree. Look at statistics, and we try to convince the students that first, mock exam helps you go through tactics of each part. You have 3 hours. You have to face all the questions in real time. So the student needs to understand how they allocate proper time. This is mini stress, of course, but that will show how they would act in real exam. Getting this experience as experience, you cannot get it otherwise. You cannot just imagine it, you have to practice it. What else? Sometimes students are afraid, especially if they go through corporate training, they're afraid that if they fail mock exam, then they will surely fail the real exam. And so they try to avoid mock exam because that will be indicator for them if they're not ready. And that's why if it's optional, if the mock exam is optional, they try to avoid it. We need to calm students down. If you're afraid that you will not pass full exam, then why should you spend money on the exam? Go through the mock exam, realize that you're not ready, understand what sections you need to develop more, work through those sections with your instructor. Because when you come to real exam and you have not trained everything in reality, you have higher chance of failing. Also, the student needs to see functionality of the exam because that adds extra stress. Mock exam will help students to understand full functionality of software. So when they come to real exam, they will be calm. Looking at your statistics, if you do your mock exam independently, then you need to understand how will you present real exam, whether on paper or through computer. If you plan computer exam, then you need to understand whether you can organize this format in your institution. You can get the help of ACCA or approved provider that will give you a resource to pass this exam. You decide what are the conditions of the exam. Our company is very strict. In this matter, we create similar situation, same conditions, same time, same quietness, and same limitation on material. But you decide for yourself what's the best for your specific institution. And also, when do you do this mock exam? There are options here. You can do it 1 week before the real one to have opportunity to check results, to give feedback to students what they need to work on, or several days ahead. But in any case, it's better to make some kind of mock exam rather than skip it altogether, because just like our survey shows and our statistics show, students pass much better if they have tried out in mock exam before. Okay. Before we answer your questions, I'd like to say, and maybe even to show, the model of checking the work of students. Let's spend some time on that. Because when students went to our traditional universities, they don't fully understand why don't they pass the exam. They have tried, they have passed good exams in university, but then at ACCA exam, they fail. So it's very important to explain to you what is the attitude of examiners, to explain how this methodology works. Our examiner team in ACCA is quite large. You have seen it in our presentation, how many students we have throughout the world, and for every subject. In addition to examiner, we have large team of examiners who are markers. They're brought into groups, have technical consultants, and we have consultants that help the examiners and markers in case of very complicated norms. So this team works on the test of the student to give proper grade. Of course, when the exam is reviewed, then all thoughts and all ideas, all logic are reviewed. Of course, if the calculation, like I said, has an error or there is grammar error, the points are not taken off. Of course, we would prefer students to be literate and to formulate their thoughts in the best way, but this ideal is still to be achieved, and we are not downgrading them for mistakes. But the best answers should be pointed out to the students. And we have those best answers at our website. They're very deep and very detailed. And sometimes students are trying to express everything they have in their head on the matter. But actually, the comments that really matter are very few in that answer. They think that the more they write, the more they impress the examiners. And so we instructors need to explain to students that ideal response is about structuring your thought. Because examiner needs to understand that you have the full answer, but if it is point by point showing the logic, then examiner sees how the student has reached the proper answer. So the student might try to explain the logic, but he does not have to give just as we see in the model, because examiner needs to see certain specific points in the answer, and that's what we try to achieve. The last thing I'd like to repeat, this is my thought, and you have pointed out in your questions, it's important to show developed calculations. That's big mistake that students have. They make calculation on their calculator, or they calculate it in their head, and they just give the answer, but the logic is not visible. This is the rule for all subjects. There should be the answer, but there should be also the logic of arriving at that answer. And if the final answer is mistaken because of wrong calculation, there still will be positive grade. For every adequate argument, for every thought, the examiner will give 1 point. In our material that you have received before the beginning of this course, and you can see that in the documents in the right, we have given you an opportunity to play the examiner. Of course, we are very limited in time, but in those materials you can see these materials for the examiner. And maybe on the weekend or in free time, you can see how the answers are marked, what you will see. First, we made this exercise based on specific question 2017. 2 requirements: prepare the consolidated statement of financial position, do proper calculation, and using those statements, there are 2 options: consolidated report and specific organizations report. The question is, explain concerns about making investment decision using consolidated and single entity financial statements. Then we looked at the answers that students provided to this question in 2017. And there are 2 possible answers, like 2 students who have written the answer to this question, and you have to examine. And we let you examine. So you get half a point for the logical step, and 1 point for relevant point in narrative answers, and we let you grade those responses, and then we'll give the examiner's evaluation to explain what student succeeded to do and what they failed to do. And we explain how we do the marking. Part C of our exam is related to judgment. So very often the answer could have several options, several valid arguments. And so when you try this out to be the examiner, you will see that there is a thin edge. That same scenario, same numbers can lead to different conclusions. And we allow you to grade our students in both situations. We also invite you to do these exercises as you teach students during your course, either through manuals of providers or give your students your questions and let them answer, but also let them grade each other, their neighbor, or show these ideal or not ideal answers on the screen and help them understand what is proper and what is not. That way they will better understand what the examiner wants to see, and as they analyze somebody else's answers, they might give better answers themselves. Here's where I invite you to conclude our main part related to my story on the exam. And I'd like to give the opportunity to Olga, myself, and to Vera to answer your questions that you have. Please write them down in messaging board, and we'll be answering them.
Я, наверное, главную мысль очень хочу сказать, что по любым вопросам.
I'm Vera Stardup. So if you have any questions related to a practical work, our first contact is our regional offices. You have seen the contacts of Janetta and Altin, and you may know other colleagues in local offices. Anyway, if you think about accreditation or you need to clarify something, our colleagues always provide specific information and assistance. So your first step is to contact them. We, as a regional team, we're available and ready to answer any questions. But I'd like to emphasize, if you don't know your offices, please take the contacts and meet them, and I hope for productive work. Thank you. I'll show the contacts at the screen. If you didn't have time to note them, I'll share the contacts. We took notes of all questions and wishes on Education Hub, so we will pass them and answer them in detail. We'll contact everyone. There was one specific question from Natalia. If there are no other questions, we can answer this question right now. Olga, can you answer the question on what recommendation we give, how the work of accreditation team changed? We know they are very loaded, they are overloaded, they reviewed their approaches because everyone is on remote work. Many people are still working remotely. Olga, can you comment on this? Sure. I will open the question to give the better answer. First, did the process of accreditation change given the current circumstances? At the moment, the process of accreditation became simpler. On one hand, all those documents, all the same documents that have to be provided earlier, like training curriculum, the examples of exams and programs, they're still important, they have to be provided, but they can be partially provided in local language. You don't have to translate into English. We understand that this is not always possible, especially if we work remotely, if we're in the lockdown. Globally, the process is the same, but the terms are simpler, the formats are simplified, and the main office is less requiring to the formats, because if you encountered this before, there were strict requirements on how the documents should look like. For the students, on the other hand, the process was simplified as well. If they cannot provide the translation. They can provide the documents in local languages. They don't have to translate into English, and colleagues in main office, colleagues in regional offices help the main office with translation or interpretation of documents in local language. Again, we understand that you cannot always translate and get the signatures and stamps of the interpreters, translators, but the package of documents remains the same as earlier. Our next question: did ACCA give some recommendations to teachers in terms of online education and instruments for holding exams? We do have at the global website of ACCA, we have the chapter dedicated to how to translate training process into online. We had a series of webinars. We had 4 webinars. The last was on the 4th of June. They're all available in the recording, and we can share them with you. And these webinars are targeted at helping the training centers and universities and other organizations to switch to online format. As regards specific holding of the exams, our recommendations are not available because this strongly depends on the subject, on the organization, on logistics, on students, on their habits. So we don't give recommendations on how to hold the exams online. This is the discretion of the teachers, trainers, departments of universities. If you provide us what you prepare, we can help you, we can consult you. In this format, we can interact and we can be of help, but we don't give a specific list of requirements because it cannot even exist, I believe. Another question: what would you advise to universities? Olga, just a second, I'd like to clarify a point on accreditation, just for us not to mislead our audience. ACCA has strict requirements for accreditation, and if we give accreditation, this shows very high level of quality. So probably when you mentioned that the process was simplified, it means that we are trying to accommodate our partners. We understand technical specificities. There is no face-to-face interaction. Most interaction is online. In this process, we're trying to simplify the process itself, to simplify filing documents to make it more convenient. But in terms of seriousness of requirements of ACCA, they're quite serious. And regardless if you file for accreditation of university or national body, the process is uncompromised. It's very serious requirements. We can say that if there is interest of a university or national body to get accredited for someone, this is quite easy to formalize what you have. For others, it may require a lot of effort to enhance, to converge with the standards, to enhance the quality. For someone, it takes 1 year or even longer. I'd like to say that requirements are complicated. We help to understand them. We help to take that path, but huge effort should be done by the universities. This is just clarification for you not to believe that ACCA reduced the requirements. We're quite strict in accreditation. This is part of our reputation. So no compromise in that. And so this is in our mutual interest. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Vera. You answered the next question: what would we advise to universities striving to be accredited? The first step is to get in touch with your regional ACCA office. And the colleagues are doing this for a long time. They're doing this a lot, so they will be able to look at the curricula, the training syllabus, at the examples of exams, and give you some recommendations on converting them in line with the ACCA requirements, and to go through all the process with you from A to Z, and to advocate the head office to get this accreditation as seamlessly as possible and as fast as possible. Sometimes the process may be delayed, especially if the curricula are very different. And I wanted to add to what Vera mentioned in terms of temporary measures that are introduced due to COVID-19. We understand that the exams may be run differently at the moment. Earlier, we did not accept oral exams. We did not accept all online exam formats. Now we try to accommodate, so many things became possible because we understand that sometimes we take oral exam by Skype and this is our reality. And the main office is trying to accommodate this. And our local offices of ACCA can assist to explain the head office how the exam is run, how it complies with ACCA requirements in the format in which it exists at the moment. So the step one is to get in touch with the representatives of ACCA in your region. And then the colleagues will take you through the accreditation process from the beginning to the end. This was the question from Natalia. I hope, Natalia, I was able to answer your question fully. Olga, there is another question. Svetlana explains what is meant by the colleagues. We had detailed webinars in English programs and in Russian programs. It is compulsory if there is serious change in exams or if the new exam is launched, to train the train, it is compulsory for all training centers which train the students. We have the compulsory webinars, and as Russian language programs were launched only recently on each of the subjects, we had webinars. They're available in recording, and if you're willing, you can write Olga or you can write in general chat and we will provide you the recordings. We recommend these very useful programs. Mostly they are targeted, just like today's event. They're not about the context on the subject, because they know the contents of the subject. This is what the teachers know, but we teach about specificities of examinations, specificities of ACCA exams, how we test, how we check. And these points are always very useful. The recordings are available if you need them. We'll be able to provide them. I'd like to add that as of today, we have performed the training sessions on the subjects of financial management and the business efficiency management, the managerial reporting. In autumn, we have to wait and see what is the format. Is it online or not? It will depend very strongly. But we plan the sessions on audit and financial reporting. I believe it will be October and November, most likely. There will be additional subjects which you can join. At the moment, this is financial management and managerial reporting. They are available and the recordings will be shared with you. Any other questions? Vera, maybe I missed something. Maybe I don't see some questions which you can see. I believe that we covered all the questions, colleagues. We are very happy. We'll be very happy to answer your questions. If you have some questions, please don't be shy. Please send us your questions. You can email your questions if you have some more detailed questions, if you don't want to ask them right now. Maybe your organizations or your entities, if you need more specific consultation on accreditation process. It has some specificities and complexities. You can always get in touch with us. We will organize separate conference call with you and we will cover the points of interest for you. Please apply to us. I tracked everything in general charts. We covered all the grounds, the audits. We're all looking forward to December 2020. We'll have audit exam in Russian, and we'll have financial reporting exam, financial reporting. Just very quickly, this is the exam, which is similar to the one which is in ACCA. It is somewhat, the paper is much more comprehensive exam than financial reporting. Financial reporting is half a level lower compared to the paper, so it's a different exam somewhat. Now, the important points, I believe it's interesting to many people, our partners translated English textbooks. You may be familiar with Plan or BPP. There's official publishers of ACCA in English, and now there is official translation of exams which were launched in Russian. Official translation is available. You can buy textbooks from our partners. So this is also great help. You should also use that. And as I understand, our time is running out. We have to finalize. Anara, I pass the floor to you. Thank you. Maybe now Alfred wants to say something, and then we will give additional information. Once again, Alfred.
I don't know if you can see me, I'm back. I have to, I guess, switch to floor. So I'd like to thank the participants and the presenters, Lucia, Olga, and Elena, for this very interesting and thorough presentation. I think, you know, we've seen the active participation of the EDUCOP members. I think it's a real tribute to the interest in ACCA as a great benchmark and a great outcome for students and faculties. And certainly having a Russian language program makes it even more so relevant and appropriate for the region. And also, before we close, I'd like to thank, we often forget our translators, Misha and Sergey, who've done a great job and worked with us for quite a while. And also our Kudo operator, Ben, Eteri, and Anara, without whom this wouldn't be possible. Some things are simpler once we're online, but there is also still a lot of background work and preparation. So thanks to all involved. So please, I'm happy to hand over if we have any further questions. Or if ACCA wants to provide further instructions.
Thank you, Alfred. I think, you know, there may be the very last point from ACCA, just to reiterate again. So happy to work with any interested party. Happy to support you throughout the journey. So again, we will review the participants list. We will review all the questions. We will pass the contacts to our local offices, and yeah, looking forward, you know, for further cooperation. Although, you know, as we see at the beginning from the post question, you know, lots of you already work with us, so I just looking forward to, you know, to continue and to have a, you know, greater cooperation in the future. And Alfred, thank you very much for this amazing opportunity to have this workshop together. I'm also very interested if, Alfred, if you and your team, if you run any evaluation forms, dear participants, you know, if not, please, in an informal way, pass your feedback, pass any details on what was particularly interesting for you, any maybe further requests you would like, further topics you would like to cover, so would be very useful for us and for our further cooperation with the World Bank. So thank you very much on behalf of ACCA.
Okay, thank you, Vera. Yes, it is something I'd forgotten to mention. We will be sending out feedback forms. That is one of the things which we normally do in the room, but we will be emailing all participants based on the registered email, and we really look forward to your honest feedback. Indeed, I think ACCA, partly because we've been working with ACCA for quite a while at the CFRR, is well known, but I think what was really great, I think, and hopefully will continue beyond this workshop, is to go beyond the initial introduction, but to go into the really the details of how the cooperation can deepen and how the programs need to be adapted, which is usually where some of the challenges happen. So, and I know this takes time. I know there are probably a lot of questions still, or additional specific areas that may not be easy to ask a specific question, but so please don't hesitate to provide some additional feedback on the forums, and certainly we look forward. Thanks again to ACCA. We look forward to continuing. Even if I'm not personally involved, I'm sure this cooperation will continue and hopefully extend to other regions. So thank you, everyone, and look forward to staying in touch. And please don't forget the CFR, the new website, where all these resources are also available, as well as the ACCA website and their resources. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое. Просто хотелось бы добавить еще раз, что видеолинки сегодня.
Thank you very much. Once again, the video links of today's event will be available. We will share them with you in the nearest days.
Available. The video recording of today's event will be available in a few days upon request for the time being. Then we will place it at some point on the website. Благодарю вас всех. Thank you very much.
Anara, maybe.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm very sorry. I just wanted to suggest maybe we make a group photo. If everybody on the floor turned their cameras on, I would make a screenshot, a substitution for a group photo from the previous live events.
Great idea.
I guess we will not be able to have more than 15 people on the screen, right? Because the flow is up to 15 people. I mean, the flow for cameras and for same time.
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, but maybe first come, first serve basis, whoever can make it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody requesting to pitch in and make it photo.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody, Svetlana, Vasil, Elena.
Okay.
I see people asking how to do that.
Request.
Yeah. Terry is accepting. Valentina Grigorievna, I see. Could you just also kindly, Firuze, could you kindly also accept? Thank you.
Hello, dear colleagues.
Thank you very much. But just to reiterate, еще раз подскажу, что, к сожалению, больше 15 мы не сможем, поскольку это группа для модераторов, для спикеров.
Pictures, because this is floor for moderators, for speaker. The platform is built that not more than 15 people can speak at the same time. So those first 15 who have applied can be on the photo. Thank you very much. Natalia Konovalenko, our colleague. We don't see you on the screen. Okay, we do. Elman, we can see you. We cannot get any more. Rosa Valentin. Okay. As many as the system would allow us, we cannot get more than 15. So I think that's the final one. Okay. There are some people who have joined in, but they don't show their camera. What's the point of you showing just your name? This is for photo, so we could see you. It's not just. It's not interesting just to see your name. So please turn on your camera. Okay. Shall we conclude here? So, Janetta was here. We went to Batumi together, the IPSAS conference in Vienna as well. Okay, that's more interesting screen. Dear colleagues, I have a request for the future. If we have such events, online and offline, please share this information with us. We'll be happy to be involved in the future meetings. Thank you very much. Thank you. We will consider that. This is a unique platform in a way because it allows to bring more than 200 people together, maybe even 300 and more at the same time. And that's the opportunity we found due to COVID. And now ACCA is doing these events together with us. So please go to our website, CFRR, WorldBank.org. Did you take a picture? Yes, I did. I want to apologize to those who I could not accept because only 15 people could be broadcast at the same time. My apologies that I could not get your photo in, but I hope next time we'll see you in person, not just on photo. Well, thank you for participating. Thank you, Alfred. Thank you, Elena, Olga, Liera. Thank you, Anara, so much for working behind the scenes and making things work. And of course, our dear interpreter, Sergey and Mikhail, who interpreted our webinar for 3 hours. And of course, thank you, Kudo team, for organizing, helping us organize this. And of course, thank you all participants. Thank you for coming. Thank you for participating in this very interesting webinar. Thank you very much.
The polls for the first time, it was the polls ever. To be honest, we never ever before launched polls, so it was the first one. And thank you, Terry, for managing this very well. Yeah, now we learned that the poll should be really simple, short, and thank you, Elena, specifically for looking through the questions, making sure that all questions could fit our platform. Thank you very much. Спасибо большое. Альфред, спасибо. До свидания.
Спасибо большое.
До свидания.